going to be the BPT arm install. We're going to run through exactly how to install it on this machine. A couple things you're going to need. We're going to run through the tools as we actually go through the install. First thing, get yourself either a block of wood, like a 2x4. We use a dead blow here. This is actually going to be used to prop the machine up on the corner. The arm itself actually mounts through here and then also the top of the cabinet. So we're going to go ahead and just tilt this forward. Now keep in mind, if the machine's bolted down, let's say they've already purchased the machine and they bolted the machine down and they want to add this arm, you will have to unbolt it from the floor. Just like that. Allows us to give access underneath the foot. So make sure it's stable, not going anywhere. We're going to go ahead and remove the side cover off here. For these, they're a metric 5. There's 4 of them. Keep in mind where you put your hardware, you're going to need these again. And you just set your side cover to the side. Next thing we're going to have to do is we need to remove these plugs. You just simply put your hand in here and push through. And then also this elongated plug on the rear. Now on the leverless machines, there is an air line that comes through a hole in this area. You will need to follow that air line into the machine and disconnect it. If you fast forward through this video, you'll find us connecting the arm to this machine. It'll be a very similar location. You need to disconnect that, pull that through the cabinet and leave it to the side, and then reconnect it when we put the arm on. So what we're going to do is the arm was lifted onto the machine here. If you noticed, this plate is on top of the cabinet towards the back 2 rear holes. This plate is on top of the foot. If you look on the back side, you're going to see 2 holes here and up behind the hose. So what we're going to do is you have, as shown earlier, you have 3 of these larger bolts. They just slip through the top here. You have your other one. This one will actually come up through the bottom of the foot. Underneath this rubber here, there's actually a hole. It actually gets pushed up through like this. Now if you notice, when you put your finger on it, you'll feel it hit the rubber and kind of slide into a notch in the rubber itself for this foot. When you do tighten this down, it will pull it in the rest of the way. These are lock nuts. So we're going to go ahead and loosely place all the nuts on. Because we still have the 2 rear holes to fill with smaller hardware. The 2 rear holes will have the 2 washers, the 2 lock nuts, and the 2 bolts themselves. I typically like to install them from the head on the inside out. Reason you keep this loose is so you can adjust for this. You go ahead and place your washer on. And your lock nut. We're going to do that for both holes, and then we're going to tighten all these up. We're going to start with tightening the top 2, this one, and then we're going to drive the 2 rear ones in. Alrighty, so we went ahead and mounted the arm. I'm going to run through a couple of the tools that I needed for this. All the nuts on these 2 and the lower mount are all 17 millimeter. The bolts themselves are actually 8. A metric 8, so these top 2, and then underneath. What we did is for getting access to the metric 8 underneath, we actually just used a standard Allen key and just drove an impact down. Or you can use a ratchet, whatever's easiest. For the bolts on the back side, I'm gonna go ahead and show these. These 2 is a metric 10, and the Allen itself is a 5 on the inside. So what we're gonna go ahead and do next, now that it's mounted solid, they're all tight, we're gonna go ahead and remove the hammer, and then we're gonna start looking at the pin and the shimming for the upper arm. The upper arm is a single bolt that mounts the pin in. It's a metric 6. Go on ahead and just set this to the side. As I said, don't lose your hardware. The pin itself will slide right out. Now, how this works is this pin, you're gonna get a collection of shims. Let's go to the arm over here. How this is supposed to work is you're going to apply whatever amount of shims you need onto the pin itself. You have your bracket, it's gonna slide through, and then that's gonna go through the lower portion of the bracket and you're gonna lock it in. Now, this is where it gets interesting. You wanna get it to where the shims will slide in, because they'll inevitably be going into this location. You don't want too many because you don't want it too tight, but you don't want it too loose. So what I'm going to do is we're gonna go on ahead and mount it, and I described to you the process that I used to determine how many shims we needed. Alrighty, so most of you guys will be working on your own. Now what he's doing is he's lining up the inside diameter of the shim with the inside of the hole. That's gonna make it easier to drop the pin in, because it will stop the pin from actually dropping in if you don't have it all lined up. Alrighty, so once you determine how many shims you need, you're gonna go ahead and push them all in. Wiggling the arm up and down will allow you to line the shims back up with the hole. You need to get these all lined up before you attempt to drop the pin in. And then go on ahead and reinstall your lock bolt. Alright, so once your arm is installed, you want to go ahead and extend it all the way out. If you lift the arm up and down, you should have very minimal amount of play. If you feel as there's too much play, you can add another shim in. Or if it's too tight where it doesn't want to rotate, or typically if it's too tight, the pin actually won't install, you can pull the shim out. You will possibly have extra shims. You can either hold on to them for your stock, which is not a bad idea. Keep them on your truck or van or in your spare parts, or you can just pitch them. Now that your shims, your bolt and everything's installed, unpull your airline. You need to straighten this as much as feasibly possible. This airline actually gets run through this hole in the top, and it actually follows inside. You have to run it down inside into this corner. Inside here, this plate is welded, this plate is welded. There is a notch about an inch, inch and a half in diameter. It is actually cut out on the inside of this corner. That is probably the most difficult part, is getting it past this portion. So we're gonna go ahead and straighten this airline physically by bending it the opposite direction. Take a little bit of time on this, because the straighter you make this, the easier it is to get through that hole. Alrighty, so if you notice, I've straightened the end of the airline out quite a bit. I would start with about this curvature. Typically a little bit straighter may make it a little bit easier, especially if you haven't done this before. Now keep in mind, when I was bending this airline, I was not kinking it. I'm literally just rounding it across the inside of my fingers. The warmth from your hands can also cause this to help become a little bit more flexible. So basically working the airline will help straighten it up. Now, there is writing on the airline. obviously from the manufacturer. You can use this, and I'm going to show you why I use this. So keep an idea where that's at in reference to where your straight edge is. What we're going to do is we're literally, there we go. You notice how my straight is pointed towards me in this corner. We're literally going to lower this in, and I'm holding it in that area. See how the writing's staying there? It gives me a reference to make sure my line is straight. So now what we're gonna do is you feel a little bit of resistance, you know you're not there. So you're gonna continue to move the air line up and down until you get it to slip through that bottom corner. Once the air line is through, you wanna feed it towards the bottom, it'll stop. Next objective is we have to get that air line out of this hole that's inside. Now you may get lucky enough and it may be right there within grabbing, which in this case it is not. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rotate this air line until I feel it. Once I feel it, I'm gonna move it up slightly because the idea is I wanna catch the edge. Now, if you can't grab it with your finger, you can use a pick to help catch this air line, which in this case I will probably do so. So, if you notice, I've got a round pick. I'm gonna go in and see if we can grab this air line. Once I find it again, there it is. I pulled it towards me. Now, found the edge, grab it, pull it out. Now we're gonna pull this extra slack out. We're gonna come back to the top here, make sure no air lines are kinked. Keep in mind that this bend and this slack needs to exist because when you rotate this, you don't want it pinching. So a little bit of slack here, it moves free. Now we're gonna go back down here, take this air line, remember that elongated plug we removed? This is where that air line is gonna go back through. This is the same area in which you're gonna move that air line if you have a leverless machine back through the same hole. So the next thing we're gonna go ahead and do is we're gonna work on connecting this to the air supply inside the machine. Okay, so now what we have is we have the air line that comes in. Now if you notice, there's quite a bit going on inside here. You have two air lines that actually come in from the machine, from the air regulator here. You have one that is not oiled, that comes right after the air regulator. You have one that is oiled, that comes after the oiler. What you need to do is, because this has an air cylinder in it, you need to connect this air line to the oiled air. Best thing you can do is look in the back. You can see here you have two holes. Move these out of the way. The left one here is not oiled. The right one is oiled. So what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna cut this air line here. We're gonna cut it, and we're gonna use the appropriate air fitting that they provided for us. Now, you're not gonna use all the air fittings on this install. Particularly if you notice you have a 6mm and an 8. And if you also notice you have a reducer from an 8 to a 6. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and cut this air line. Now I recommend when you cut this air line that you use a razor blade or a hose cutter, because what happens, and I'm gonna show you here, if you cut it, it's deformed. It's also not really a straight cut. That's part of that is me just not necessarily paying attention. So let's say if I'm very careful and I do this, if you notice deformed. When you insert that into the air line, that has a good tendency of either tearing or cutting the O-ring inside the fitting. Now, my recommendation if you do this, straighten this edge up to make sure it's round. If you run your fingers over it, there's no edges. Now you could actually insert this, if this was the fitting, to give you an idea. It should go very well. Now, if you notice when you connect these air lines, there's a collar. And the same thing goes with any of our plastic fittings. If you push on this collar, it releases the air line. So if I push this in, you feel it catch the O-ring, and I push it on all the way till it stops. It doesn't come off, it's sealed. If I need to remove this, I simply take this collar, push in, pull the air line off. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and cut that air line, find out which one of these we need in terms of the air fittings provided, and we're gonna go ahead and tee this into that air supply line. Alrighty, so what I have done is I have cut the airline. Remember, I went ahead and straightened the airline. I pushed it into this one was an 8mm coupler. And I went and put in the reducer. That brought it down to the 6mm airline that runs back to the rear. In this case, we've got an extra 6mm T that we actually don't need. I'd recommend you hold on to this stuff. It's free extra parts that you may need for other service repair. So keep it on your van, keep it with your spare parts, wherever that may be. You may need it for somebody else's machine. But on this particular build, it's already done. Alrighty, so an alternative way to run the airline off the BPT is to run it on the outside of the machine over past the FRL. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna connect this with the provided T and reducer. We're gonna be connecting it to the oiler outlet side of the FRL. You just push it on the coupler and you can pull the line out. This may have to be trimmed. I'm gonna see what we can do here. In this situation, I'm gonna wanna trim it a little bit. Remember, when you trim these and you cut them with the side cuts, you gotta make sure you straighten it back up so it doesn't tear the O-rings inside. I'm gonna try flipping it here and see if I get a better connection. That I feel much better about. Because earlier, when I was starting to push this in long ways, I was starting to get a kink in this airline. Now, we've got a good solid connection that's oiled back to the BPT. Alrighty, so now that the airline's been plumbed, I would recommend keeping the side cover off until you connect air back to the machine. Going ahead and connect it. Make sure it works. There's no air leaks particularly. Keep in mind, you have down and up. Make sure the orientation's right with the BPT itself. So we're gonna go ahead and put the cover on this one, and then we're gonna install the foot, and the installation will be complete. Alrighty, so we went ahead and put the side cover on. Next, we're gonna go through and install the actual foot itself. This comes pre-assembled. Keep in mind that make sure you inform the customer that these are wearable. These feet are. So if they break it, damage it, which it will happen in time, they are replaceable with a single Allen screw. There is a clip that you pull out. This is just a sprung clip. So as such. There are 3 adjustment holes on here, depending on what length you need. We typically orient them in the middle, and then however the customer works with it, they'll either extend it or shorten it. And then at that point, I would recommend running through a quick tire installation with the customer. If training is there, then you can run through it at that time. If not, I would make sure the customer is aware of how this works and proper usage. And if there's anything further, you can give our service a call. Thank you.